This guide covers all the actions Dawntrail's Red Mage learns from level 50 to 100 in order. We go over how each action is meant to be used and recommend ways to use it when relevant. We start with a tutorial on how to play Red Mage at level 50, and then as we work our way to level 100, summarize the changes in the rotation at level 60, 70, 80 and 90. In the final summary at level 100, we outline an optimized opener and explain how it leads into the general rotation, alongside 2-minute burst considerations. We also touch on the stat priorities of the Red Mage. Now then, let's start with the balance gauge. This gauge measures your white and black mana. Casting spells will produce these two mana types depending on the spell. If the difference between the two types of mana is greater than 30, then you will favor the greater one, which makes the weaker one generate slower. You should avoid this. The solution is to try to always focus on producing the lower one when you have the choice. When the gem turns red, you have enough mana to start and finish your melee combo. You need 50 of both mana types to do so. We will return to this later. The primary mechanic of the Red Mage is the passive trait Dual Cast. Whenever you take the time to cast a spell, you gain Dual Cast, which makes your next spell with a cast time instant. The way that this interacts with your toolkit is that you have both fast spells like Jolt and slow spells like the Thunder. It should be clear from the tooltips that the fast spells are only slightly weaker than the slow spells, so casting the slow spells probably is not a good idea. Instead, you cast Jolt, which then grants you Dual Cast, allowing you to cast the Thunder or the Arrow instantly. Remember to try to focus on casting the one that corresponds to the mana you have the least of. Also take note that if you use a weapon skill or sprint for some reason, Dual Cast will end as well. Whenever you cast the Thunder or the Arrow, there is a 50% chance that it enables you to use one of the stronger fast spells, the Fire and the Stone. These spells take priority over Jolt due to the higher mana production as well as the higher damage. Additionally, if you somehow have access to one of these spells, you have a proc as it is commonly called, but you also somehow have a dual cast proc, then you may want to prioritize using the slow spell you do not have a proc from. Just keep in mind that it is more important that you don't end up favoring that mana type as a result. The Red Mage also has access to 4 abilities that all do damage. Abilities are actions that can be cast between spells, as they are unaffected by the global recast timer. However, they still take a bit more than half a second to perform. See the video in the description for a more detailed explanation. Flesh is a simple attack action that you want to use as often as possible. Don't bother sitting on it, the cooldown is so short you will probably get it available again in time if for some reason you really do need it for something. However, do remember to only use it after a dual casted spell. Corps à corps and Déplacement are two actions that together serve a specific purpose. Corps à corps moves you to your target, such that you can use your melee combo, while Déplacement moves you back to a distance. Use these accordingly, but always remember that the amount of running you can do between casts due to dual cast may allow you to simply run up to the enemy or run away from them, depending on what you require. Consider that both Corps à corps and Déplacement do significant damage too, and that the burst movements can bring you to safety much faster than running. You also have access to Engagement, which shares cooldown with Déplacement. The only difference is that Engagement does the attack without the backflip, which can be helpful in small arenas where you would rather not get thrown about. Each action can hold up to 2 uses, so you can use one of each for damage and then keep one just in case, or you can use all of them for damage. Your melee combo, Riposte, Zwerchau, Redoublement, is your most powerful single target attacking option when it is enchanted from your balance gauge. To do so, you need to have 50 of both white and black mana to start. The recast timers on these 3 attacks are significantly faster than your spells, causing them to be effectively way more than 50% stronger than your general spellcasting options in terms of damage per second. To be clear, your melee combo is not worth using if it is not enchanted. Next, let's talk about area of effect options, or AoE for short. At level 50, your AoE options are slightly limited. Essentially, all you can do is use the Thunder 2 or the Arrow 2 and then scatter, alternating the mana types to keep them both up. At this level, this equates to 220 potency every 5 seconds per target. This introduces a set of specific strategies depending on the amount of enemies at hand. For exactly 2 targets, replace Jolt with the Thunder 2 and the Arrow 2, or in other words, replace the fast single target spell Jolt with the fast AoE spells. The Fire and the Stone are, however, still more powerful than the AoE options. For 3 or more targets, replace the Thunder and the Arrow 1, note these are the single target slow spells, with Scatter, the AoE slow spell. Additionally, you also replace all fast single target spells with the AoE fast spells. At 5 targets or more, you might want to just not use your melee combo at all. Personally, I would also recommend keeping your melee combos for 2 targets or less at this level. It is just better time spent, really. You should also remember to use your Flèche, Corps à Corps and Déplacement or Engagement in between your spellcasts for extra free damage. The final ability of the Red Mage is Acceleration. This causes your next the Thunder, the Arrow or Scatter to be instant, and guaranteed to proc the associated spell. In the case of Scatter, it instead adds 50 potency to the attack. At this level, using Acceleration on cooldown to skip a use of a fast spell, or for the benefit of gaining significant AoE damage, is typically better than saving it for being able to cast while moving. However, if you know you need the movement shortly, it can be beneficial to wait a moment. Finally, let's talk about role actions. Swift Cast is a simple ability that is used in the exact same way as Acceleration. Just keep in mind that unlike Acceleration, Swift Cast can be spent on any spell, so make sure that it is a slow spell. Of course, Swift Cast also does not have the guaranteed proc or damage boosting properties, and for these reasons, can more reasonably be kept for movement if you want to be sure. Also, if you happen to have all 3, the order the instant casts are spent in is 1. Acceleration, 2. Dual Cast, 3. Swift Cast. The duration or order of activation does not matter. Next, Lucid Dreaming causes you to gain nearly 4000 MP over 21 seconds. Red Mage's rotation is MP negative, so over the course of a long fight, you might need to use Lucid Dreaming. I recommend using Lucid Dreaming if you drop below 7500 MP. It can also be immensely helpful after you die for recovering MP again. Surecast allows you to block knockback effects for a bit, and also prevents you from being interrupted by taking large amounts of damage, which can be helpful if you get unwanted attention in a fight, like a boss. Addle reduces the damage done by your target for a bit, with magic damage being reduced twice as much. I recommend using this when expecting a boss to do raid-wide damage or large damage to the tank. Don't forget about this one, it is a lot more helpful than you might think. Finally, Sleep allows you to put several enemies to sleep at once. However, outside of very niche situations, this is typically not a super important spell. In a pinch, it can also be used to prevent a mob from casting a spell. Now, to summarize Red Mage at level 50, let's cover an actual boss fight opener and rotation. 5 seconds before combat starts, start casting the Thunder, and then immediately the Arrow, weaving Flèche. If either one of them did not lead to a proc, also weave Acceleration and cast that one again while weaving Corps à Corps. Then, if the other also is missing a proc, weave Swift Cast to use that one again, weaving Engagement and another Corps à Corps. Then finally cast a fast into a slow spell and weave Engagement. Naturally, if you do proc things, move Corps à Corps and Engagement earlier in the opener and make use of the procs until you can use Acceleration and Swift Cast to get extra procs. This then leads to the general rotation. For single target, you attack primarily by alternating fast spells and slow spells, prioritizing the more powerful procced fast spells over the non-procced Jolt, and try to prioritize the slow spell for which you do not have a proc waiting, while also prioritizing the slow spell that produces the mana type you currently have less of. When you reach 50 white and black mana, you can use your melee combo, where Corps à Corps and Déplacement or Engagement may be convenient to assist in the movement required, but should be used regularly just for their damage potencies as well. Remember to use Flèche on cooldown and make use of Acceleration to get more procs and for skipping fast spells. Swift Cast can also be used as a small damage gain or mobility tool. You can use Acceleration and Swift Cast in pairs to make sure that Flèche continues to line up with your dual cast over the course of a fight. This trick will become more important later, where we will go a bit more in detail with it. Lucid Dreaming is useful for keeping your MP high. For AoE adjustments, fast AoE spells override Jolt on 2 targets and all fast spells on 3 targets or more. Scatter overrides slow spells at 3 targets or more. Don't bother using melee combos with 5 or more enemies, but consider saving the melee combo for more single target focused combat anyway. Don't forget to use Flesh, Acceleration, Swiftcast, Corps, Déplacement, Engagement, and Lucid Dreaming. With that, let's continue on past level 50. At level 52, you learn the Moulinet melee combo, which works as an AoE alternative to the single target melee combo. It also costs a combined 50 of each mana to complete, but is concentrated into a single button with Enchanted Moulinet, Enchanted Moulinet 2, and Enchanted Moulinet 3, and is better than the single target melee combo on 3 or more targets. At level 54, you learn the spell Vercure, which heals for a very respectable amount for a spammable DPS heal, and so can be used in a tough spot to save yourself or someone else. It also activates dual cast, so you can use this to prepare dual cast without an attack target when you need to. At level 56, you learn the ability Contre Sixt, which is an AoE attack that is very similar to Flesh. At any point you would use Flesh, you should also use Contre Sixt, even on single target, since they do not share cooldown. At level 58, you learn the ability Embolden, which is a raid-wide damage buff that boosts everyone in your raid's damage, but specifically only boosts magic damage for yourself. This is relevant because all of your ability-based attacks just so happen to all do physical damage, betrayed by them explicitly not denoting them doing either an element or unaspected damage. You should use Embolden as close to on cooldown as possible, although in a coordinated group you may want to line up the cast initially with other raid buffs. This does indeed mean that it is your responsibility to line up your melee combo bursts with Embolden and not the other way around. At level 60, you learn the ability Manification, which gives you 3 stacks of magicked swordplay, which essentially functions as freebie tickets for 3 enchanted weapon skills. Effectively, this allows you to immediately perform a 1-2-3 combo of your choice, and this should be used just about on cooldown, which conveniently lines up with Embolden at the moment. Since level 50, you've unlocked an AoE melee combo, a heal, an additional oGCD in Contre Sixt, as well as a cooldown to immediately jump into your melee combo with Manification, alongside a raid damage buff in Embolden. This does change your opener somewhat. 5 seconds before combat starts, cast Thunder into the arrow, weaving both Swift Cast and Acceleration. And if you didn't proc one of them, cast that one first, then the other. Otherwise, the order does not matter. After the first instant cast, weave Flesh and Contre Sixt while moving into melee range. On the second instant cast, weave Embolden and Manification. Then use Enchanted Riposte, weaving Corps, Enchanted Zwerchau, weaving Engagement, then Enchanted Redoublement, weaving Corps and Engagement. For Emboldens later in a fight, if you stockpile enough mana for a melee combo beforehand, you can gain a bit of damage by using both the Manification melee combo and the regular melee combo during Embolden. At level 62, Jolt is upgraded to Jolt 2, and all of your other single target spells get a big boost to their potencies. Your AoE options are still better on 3 or more targets, but on 2 targets, you should now use Jolt instead of the Thunder 2 and the Arrow 2. Remember that, should you have the Fire of the Stone procs, they should still take priority over Jolt on 2 targets as well. Another major change this causes is in the way you should use Swiftcast and Acceleration. The massive boost to Jolt's potency means that skipping it is a significantly smaller damage gain than it was before. On the other hand, as you may have already noticed, using Acceleration or Swiftcast kind of misaligns the cooldown of Flesh and Contre Sixt compared to your 5-second dual cast sets, which means using either Acceleration or Swiftcast to skip one Jolt at the same time also guarantees you will delay your next Flesh and Contre Sixt by 2.5 seconds. For this reason, optimally, continue to use Acceleration and Swiftcast for movement reasons, but aside from that, you should try to use Acceleration and Swiftcast together to adjust by 5 seconds instead of just 2.5. Or use them individually to adjust by 2.5 seconds if Flesh and Contre Sixt are already off by 2.5 seconds for some reason. This does indeed mean that it is okay to sit on the cooldowns a bit to have them for these purposes. At level 64, you learn the spell Verraise, which is the Red Mage version of a resurrection spell. While it has the similar long cast time that all of these types of spells have, dual cast works on it, enabling you to raise a player by casting Jolt or the Cure and then Verraise. Don't forget to use Lucid Dreaming, and watch your MP, but remember that bringing another player back to life is always more valuable than even your next 2 spell casts, so don't be stingy. At level 66, Scatter is upgraded to Impact, which boosts its potency so immensely that it is now superior to use Impact on 2 targets over using the Thunder and the Arrow. This means that on 2 targets specifically, your rotation is to cast Jolt, Impact repeatedly. At level 68, you unlock the mana stack on your balance gauge, and the spell Verflare. When you use the enchanted melee attacks, each step grants 1 mana stack. When you have 3 mana stacks, your the Thunder and the Thunder 2 both turn into Verflare, which does a large amount of damage with an AoE component and no cast time. If you generate mana stacks and then use any spell, then the stacks are immediately lost. This means that your melee combos with a single target or AoE are now effectively 1-2-3 flare. If the flare is used while you have less black mana than white mana, then it will always ready the fire. So, at this level specifically, you should try to always use melee combos with an excess of white mana, if possible. At level 70, you learn the spell Verholy, which is the white magic equivalent to Verflare, and overrides both the Arrow and the Arrow 2 under the same criteria. Now, whenever you have 3 mana stacks, you can use Verflare or Verholy depending on which one is lower. And if you already have a proc of the one that is lower, you can chance on getting a proc with the other one. Although, remember that if the gap between the mana types become larger than 30, then mana imbalance will make the lower one more difficult to generate, so take that into consideration as well. Make sure you always generate mana stacks while your mana types are unequal, such that there always will be one type that is lower. If they are equal, then neither one is guaranteed. Since level 60, you've unlocked Verraise and also gotten massive potency improvements to your single target spells and also your AoE. You also extended the melee combo with Verflare and Verholy. This changes your opener somewhat. 5 seconds before combat starts, cast the Thunder and the Arrow and weave both Swift Cast and Acceleration. Then cast the Thunder, weaving Flesh and Contra Sixt while moving into melee range. The Thunder again, weaving Embolden and Manification. Then Riposte, weaving Corps à Corps, Zwerchau, weaving Engagement, Redoublement, weaving Corps à Corps and Engagement, and then use Verholy. Then finish up by using the procs you got. The reason we use the Thunder repeatedly at the start is to make sure we have an uneven amount of mana. A thing to take note of is that with the introduction of Verflare and Verholy, your melee combo takes about 7.7 seconds in total to pull off, which means it will always misalign Flesh and Contra Sixt, so it could be beneficial to use Acceleration or Swift Cast to realign afterwards. At level 72, the potencies of Déplacement and Engagement are increased slightly. This changes nothing for your rotation. At level 74, the cooldown of Contra Sixt is reduced slightly, and the potencies of the Thunder 2 and the Arrow 2 are increased slightly. This does not change your rotation. At level 76, you learn the weapon skill Reprise. When you have 5 of each mana type, the Enchanted Reprise is an instant ranged attack that you can use if you have to move for a while and have no other options. Just be aware that it is very expensive in terms of mana types, so try to use it as little as possible, if at all. It is absolutely considered a last resort, because casting something is better than casting nothing, but Reprise is not very good value for its cost. At level 78, the cooldown of Manification is reduced slightly, and it gains an effect that makes the next 5 magic attacks, including melee combos, do extra damage. The intended purpose is that you use Manification, followed by a melee combo, and then Verflare or Verholy. The 5th attack is intended to be the spell that you learn at level 80. This means that it is much more important that you use Manification followed immediately by melee combo sequence stuff. In fact, the shorter cooldown is helpful to realign Manification with Embolden, which can be necessary if you delayed Manification for the back-to-back melee combos previously mentioned. In very, very long fights, using Manification exactly on cooldown, causing it to slowly misalign from Embolden more and more, can lead to getting more Manification uses, which is a gain overall. At level 80, you learn the spell Scorch. When you successfully cast Verflare or Verholy, Jolt and Impact both turn into Scorch, which is an even more powerful attack that also has an AoE component and no cast time. You always use this. This addition also means that the melee combo takes a total of 10.2 seconds to perform, meaning it no longer misaligns your rotation with respect to Flesh and Contra Sixt. Since level 70, the main change to your rotation is that Scorch is added onto the end of the melee combo. Take note that Modification will cancel your ability to follow up with Scorch, or break your melee combo if you suddenly choose to weave Modification in the middle of either combo. So, if you are going to use Modification, either use it before the melee combo starts, or use it after Redoublement specifically. For your opener, simply add Scorch after Verholy. At level 82, the Thunder and the Arrow are upgraded into the Thunder 3 and the Arrow 3, making them stronger and flashier, but it does not change your rotation. At level 84, Jolt 2 permanently upgrades to Jolt 3, and your single target melee combo, as well as the rest of your regular spells, get a boost to their potencies, meaning only the spells that follow after the melee combo, and also the Moulinet combo, do not get a boost. Notably, at this level, using Jolt 3 is better than using the Stone and the Fire procs at all at this time, outside of extremely niche cases. Simply because Jolt 3 does 20 more potency, and the Stone and the Fire only generate 1 more mana to compensate, which is rarely ever worth it. This might change, and if it does, I will try to mention it in a pinned comment, but at this level, you should simply not use the Fire or the Stone at all. At level 86, you learn the ability Magic Barrier, which reduces magic damage taken for your raid and also boosts the healing they receive. The best time to use this is mostly any time you would want to use Addle to weaken a raid-wide attack, as these tend to be magic more often than not. If the tank is going to take a big magic hit, you can also use it to help just them. At level 88, Acceleration is upgraded to have 2 charges. This means you can much more regularly use Acceleration and Swift Cast as a pair for damage reasons, assuming you don't need it for movement or alignment of Flesh and Contra Sixt. Try to use both Swift Cast and just one Acceleration for this, such that they both go on cooldown when you choose to do so. I also highly recommend making sure Acceleration never sits on 2 charges if you can. At level 90, the damage buff of Modification is extended to 6 magic attacks, and you learn the spell Resolution. When you successfully cast Scorch, Jolt and Impact, then turn into Resolution, which you should use immediately too, for even more damage with an AoE component. Keep in mind that Resolution is a surprisingly thin line AoE, while Verflare, Verholy and Scorch are all circle AoE centered on your target. Additionally, adding in Resolution means that the full melee sequence takes around 12.7 seconds now, meaning that it once again misaligns Flesh and Contra Sixt. The extra acceleration charge can help immensely with realigning that. Since level 80, you've gained an extra charge of acceleration, and Jolt 3 is introduced, which is objectively better than the Fire and the Stone. You also got various other potency gains, and Resolution is added at the end of your melee combos. In your opener, the main change at this point is that you simply don't use the Fire or the Stone procs at the end, and that Resolution is added. For bursts mid-fight, if you plan to use 2 melee combos during Embolden, you can get the most value out of it by setting it up such that you are weaving Embolden after Redoublement, so you can do a full magic burst and then a whole melee combo and burst again within the duration. At level 92, Embolden is upgraded to grant you Thorned Flourish and turn into Vice of Thorns until it is spent. Vice of Thorns is an oGCD that does a large amount of damage with an AoE component. This is simply weaved during the burst at some point where it fits. At level 94, Swiftcast's cooldown is reduced to 40 seconds and the potency of basically all of your single target relevant attacks, except Jolt 3, gain a potency boost. This of course means that the Stone and the Fire are once again worth using. Additionally, Impact is now only better than your other slow spells on 3 or more targets. At level 96, Acceleration is upgraded to grant Grand Impact Ready, which turns Jolt 3 and Impact into Grand Impact until it is spent. Grand Impact is an instant spell that deals a large amount of damage with an AoE component, and should simply be used whenever it is available. Awkwardly, this means Acceleration now offers 2 instant spells rather than 1, so it no longer offers this realignment property that Swiftcast does. You can plan acceleration such that these double instants overlap with the time frame where Flesh or Contra Sixt are going to be available to circumvent this problem. Because of this sort of convenience, it might also be more reliably safe to use Swiftcast close to on cooldown to skip fast spells too. At level 98, Adel is upgraded to last 15 seconds instead of 10. This does not change how you use it. At level 100, Manification is upgraded to grant Prefulgence ready when you have spent all 6 stacks of the buff, which turns Manification into Prefulgence until it is spent. Prefulgence is another oGCD that deals a massive amount of damage with an AoE component, and should of course be weaved as soon as possible. Now, to round off, let's first talk about an opener followed by general rotation, as well as how to work with the 2-minute burst. And finally, let's briefly touch on stat priorities on gear. Let's begin. 5 seconds before combat starts, begin casting the Thunder, and then dual cast the Arrow weaving Swiftcast. If you intend to use a gem draft, weave it here as well. Also, start making your way to melee range. Then cast the Thunder weaving Flesh and Acceleration. Another the Thunder weaving Embolden and Manification. Then use Riposte weaving Contra Sixt, Zerschal weaving Engagement, Redoublement weaving Corps à Corps. Then use Verholy weaving Vise of Thorns, Scorch weaving Engagement and Corps à Corps. Then Resolution weaving Prefulgence. And then use Grand Impact weaving Acceleration again. Then cast the Fire, Grand Impact, the Thunder weaving Flesh, the Arrow. Then cast the Fire into the Thunder, the Stone into the Arrow weaving Swiftcast, and finish with the Arrow weaving Contra Sixt. This long tail end of the opener makes use of a few oddities with instant casts, but just remember that fast spells don't spend acceleration, and the spending order is Acceleration, Dual Cast, Swiftcast. This then leads to the general rotation. Red Mage's rotation is heavily focused on using Flesh and Contra Sixt on cooldown. And making the most of Acceleration and Swiftcast to ensure this is important for optimization. Although Swiftcast is also caught in the middle since it is also better to use it close to on cooldown for more slow casts. Acceleration also has this problem, although I recommend simply holding one charge for things like emergency movement or emergency weaving to make sure Flesh and Contra Sixt get used on cooldown. And only using Acceleration purely for damage if you're about to reach 2 charges. Also, make sure to never sit on 2 charges of Corps à Corps and Engagement. Your choice if you want to hold one of each for movement, but they can also be used in bursts for extra damage if other players offer some raid buffs. Speaking of which, Embolden should be used as close to on cooldown as possible. Manification is very strange. If you're not sure when a fight is going to end, it is actually better to use Manification as close to on cooldown as possible, even if it means it slowly drifts further and further away from Embolden. This is because doing this can, over the course of a fight, lead to more Manifications, which is ultimately more valuable. Speaking of melee combos, another way to ensure Flesh and Contra Sixt are used on cooldown is to start a melee combo such that Flesh and Contra Sixt will come up during this barrage of instant casts, which also frees up some swift casts and accelerations to use elsewhere. For the 2-minute burst, it is worth keeping in mind that the melee combo both represents your biggest damage spike, but also the most mobile section of your rotation, as it represents 12.7 seconds of mostly free movement. So, if a fight calls for set mobility, it is more beneficial to use melee combos during these high movement sections. With that said, while the melee combo is too long to fit 2 full combos in a 20-second buff window, getting the best part of them inside is beneficial. If you do have the resources for 2 melee combos leading up to the 2-minute burst, start your melee combo 1 second before the buffs come up, effectively meaning weave Embolden after Riposte. Additionally, if you plan to use 3 melee combos within a gem draft, start your melee combo 5 seconds before the burst, and when you intend to use the gem draft. Which means weave Embolden and gem draft after Redoublement. Also, remember that using Manification in the middle of a combo cancels it, so only use Manification either before a melee combo or after Redoublement. For AoE adjustments, on 3 or more targets, switch to using the Arrow 2, the Thunder 2 and Impact instead of the single target options. Also, use the Moulinet combo instead of the single target combo. Also, make sure to use Acceleration and Swiftcast on Impact. Aside from this, use everything else as on single target. Take note that Moulinet is a cone in front of you, and Resolution is a surprisingly thin line. Finally, regarding stat priorities, take note that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats. This means you should always prioritize gear with higher item level as long as it has intelligence on it. After that, Red Mage's stat priority is critical hit, then determination and direct hit. Determination and direct hit are almost identical in value, with determination being a tiny bit better, so try to aim for them to be about equal, with determination slightly ahead. Having a very small amount of spell speed to get your GCD to either 2.49 or 2.48 can be slightly beneficial, but aside from this, Red Mage doesn't gain very much from spell speed at all. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Dawntrail, the trait that introduced Jolt 3 actually only buffed Jolt 2's potency to 320, which kept it 20 potency behind Verstone and Verfire. As Jolt 3 added an extra 40 potency to this causes this weird breaking of logic where Verstone and Verfire aren't really worth using at all from level 84 to 93.